Some people wear cheap jackets to hide their money. Others wear expensive smiles to hide their fear. Rain slid slowly down the tall windows of Marlowe's steakhouse, turning the Manhattan skyline into blurred gold and silver streaks. Inside, crystal glasses clinked softly beneath warm amber lights, while low jazz drifted through the room like cigarette smoke from another decade. Claire Bennett moved quietly between tables with the kind of calm that expensive restaurants tried to imitate but could never truly teach. Black apron, white shirt, hair pinned neatly behind her head. Nothing about her stood out at first glance. And maybe that was why she noticed everything. The man at table 12 arrived alone at exactly 8:17 p.m. No reservation name matched the face he gave the hostess. No wedding ring. Dark charcoal jacket slightly damp from the rain. Boots too well-crafted for a man pretending not to care about appearances. But it was the watch that caught Claire's attention first. A Patek Philippe worth more than her yearly rent hidden beneath the sleeve of a worn leather coat. Men who wanted attention flashed watches like that. Men who hid them usually had reasons. "Just the steak," he said when she approached. His voice was smooth, controlled. "Medium rare. Black coffee." Claire nodded once and wrote the order without speaking. Most customers filled silence because silence made them nervous. This man seemed to study it. As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "And keep the check open. Not arrogant. Not flirtatious. Just observant." Claire glanced toward the bar while tucking the notepad into her apron. A man in a navy baseball cap sat alone near the corner mirror nursing a whiskey he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. His eyes moved toward table 12 again. Then away. Then back. Claire continued walking, calm, unhurried. In the kitchen, flames hissed beneath cast-iron pans while cooks shouted over the noise of dinner rush. But Claire's thoughts stayed on the customer with the hidden watch and the man pretending not to stare at him. "Table 12? Asked Miguel at the grill. "Ribeye. Medium rare." Claire nodded. "Don't overcook it." Miguel smirked. "You say that like his life depends on it." Claire didn't answer. 10 minutes later, she carried the steak carefully through the crowded dining room. The smell of butter and rosemary drifted upward with the steam. Table 12 sat perfectly still, one hand resting beside his coffee cup while his eyes casually scanned reflections in the restaurant windows instead of looking directly around the room. Military habit, Claire thought instantly. Or executive paranoia. Maybe both. She lowered the plate in front of him gently. "Your steak, sir." "Thank you." His eyes lifted toward hers for half a second. Sharp gray. Tired in a way expensive people rarely allowed themselves to appear. Claire reached into her apron pocket and placed a folded white note beside the steak knife without explanation. Then she walked away. No hesitation. No dramatic pause. Just quiet footsteps against polished hardwood floors. At table 12, the man frowned slightly before unfolding the note beneath the table light. 5 words stared back at him in clean handwriting. "Leave before the dessert arrives." For the first time since entering the restaurant, the stranger's expression cracked. Not fear. Recognition. His eyes lifted immediately toward Claire across the dining room. But she was already pouring wine for another table as if nothing had happened at all. And near the corner mirror, the man in the navy cap slowly put his untouched whiskey down. Ethan Cole read the note twice without moving a single muscle in his face. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows like impatient fingers. But inside Marlowe's steakhouse, everything remained warm, polished, and deceptively calm. He folded the note once and slid it beneath the edge of his plate. Then he reached for the steak knife with steady hands that had signed billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation. But Claire noticed the difference immediately. His eyes no longer wandered casually around the room. Now they measured exits, distances, reflections in glass. She continued refilling water at another table while quietly tracking the movement near the corner mirror. The man in the navy cap pretended to check his phone again. No food ordered. No conversation. Just occasional glances toward Ethan. Too controlled to be random. Ethan cut into the steak slowly. Perfect medium rare. Pink center. Rosemary butter melting over the surface. Most people would have tasted the food first. He did not. Instead, he lifted the coffee cup toward his lips while studying Claire through the reflection in the dark window beside him. She never looked back directly. That interested him more than the note itself. Fear usually came with nervous energy. But this waitress moved with the calm precision of someone who already understood the room better than everyone inside it. Ethan had spent years learning how people behaved around money. Investors leaned forward too quickly. Politicians smiled too long. Consultants rehearsed sincerity like actors practicing lines. But Claire Bennett gave him nothing. No curiosity. No anxiety. No fascination with the expensive watch he had purposely left visible now. That alone made her dangerous. At the service station near the kitchen doors, another waitress leaned closer to Claire. "Table 12 keeps staring at you," she whispered with a grin. Claire dried a wine glass slowly. "No, he keeps thinking." "What is the difference?" Claire glanced toward Ethan briefly. "Thinking people notice more." The other waitress laughed softly before hurrying away with a tray of martinis. Claire returned the wine glass to the shelf. Her heartbeat remained steady, but her instincts had sharpened the moment Ethan walked through the front door. Wealthy men usually entered restaurants trying to be seen. Ethan had entered trying not to be remembered. That was different. The worn leather jacket was expensive despite the creases. His haircut looked intentionally uneven, like someone trying to erase precision with carelessness. But people who grew up ordinary did not sit with their backs angled toward mirrored surfaces to watch reflections. They did not scan hands before faces. And they definitely did not wear a six-figure watch beneath a scuffed coat unless they were hiding from something. Or someone. At 8:42 p.m., the man in the navy cap finally stood from the bar. Claire noticed how his gaze flicked briefly toward the hostess stand before returning to table 12. A signal. Subtle, but real. Ethan noticed it too. He reached into his jacket pocket casually and placed a black American Express card beside the check folder. The kind issued only to people whose money changed rooms before they entered them. Claire saw the card from 20 feet away and felt her suspicions settle into certainty. Undercover rich. Maybe famous. Definitely important. But what unsettled her was not the money. It was the exhaustion hidden behind his eyes. The kind carried by men who trusted numbers more than people for too long. She walked toward his table one final time, coffee pot in hand. Ethan looked up before she spoke. "Dessert menu?" she asked softly. Their eyes met fully for the first time. Gray against blue. Silence stretched between them beneath the low jazz and distant thunder outside. Then Claire poured fresh coffee into his cup and said quietly enough for only him to hear, "You have less than 2 minutes now." Ethan did not touch the coffee. His fingers rested lightly against the warm porcelain cup while the noise of the restaurant faded into something distant and hollow. 2 minutes. Claire Bennett had said it so calmly that somehow it sounded less like a warning and more like a fact she had already accepted. Across the dining room, candlelight flickered against polished glasses and silverware, while couples leaned toward each other in quiet conversations worth more than most people's monthly rent. Yet Ethan suddenly felt every reflection in the room watching him. He checked his watch without lowering his head. 8:43. The man in the navy cap had moved closer to the hallway leading toward the restrooms. Not rushing, not nervous, just repositioning. Claire stepped away from table 7 after refilling wine and disappeared briefly through the kitchen doors. Ethan's instincts told him to leave immediately. But another instinct, older and harder to explain, told him to stay long enough to understand why a waitress with careful eyes seemed to know exactly what kind of danger entered a room before anyone else noticed it. He had built an empire reading weakness in people. Startups, executives, investors. Every negotiation came down to the same thing eventually. Somebody always revealed themselves under pressure. But Claire revealed almost nothing. And that unsettled him more than the note. Near the hostess stand, thunder rolled softly outside while cold rain streaked against the glass doors. Ethan reached for the check folder slowly. Empty. No receipt inside yet. Interesting. He glanced toward the kitchen again just as Claire returned carrying a tray with 2 bourbon glasses for another table. Their eyes met only briefly. Then she tilted her head almost invisibly toward the hallway beside the wine cellar. Not an order. A suggestion. Ethan stood calmly and buttoned his jacket. Nobody in the restaurant paid attention at first. Wealthy men stood up in expensive restaurants every 30 seconds. But the man in the navy cap immediately straightened near the hallway entrance. Confirmation. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and walked casually toward the back corridor beside the wine cellar instead of the main exit. The lights dimmed slightly there. Softer. Quieter. Framed black and white photographs lined the walls beside shelves filled with imported bottles from France and Italy. Halfway down the corridor, Claire stepped out carrying a stack of folded linen napkins against her chest as if she had simply been restocking supplies. "You move carefully for someone pretending to be ordinary," she said quietly without stopping. Ethan slowed beside her. "And you notice too much for someone serving steak." Claire finally looked at him directly. Her blue eyes stayed steady. "People who lie about money usually want attention. You lied about something else." Ethan almost smiled at that. Almost. "What makes you think I lied?" Claire shifted the napkins slightly. "Because when you walked in, you checked the mirror before the menu." Silence settled between them for one long second. Somewhere behind the walls, dishes clinked softly and jazz music drifted faintly through the hallway speakers. Ethan studied her face carefully now. Mid-20s. Calm posture. No visible jewelry except a thin silver ring on one finger. But her eyes carried something older than the rest of her. Not fear. Experience. "Who exactly are you?" he asked quietly. Claire's expression barely changed. "Tonight? Just the waitress trying to stop you from making a mistake." Then footsteps echoed faintly from the far end of the hallway. Slow. Approaching. Claire's eyes flicked past Ethan's shoulder for half a heartbeat before returning to him. "Kitchen exit," she said softly. "Now." Ethan moved without hesitation this time. Not because he trusted Claire completely, but because every instinct sharpened by 15 years in corporate warfare told him she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever was unfolding tonight. The kitchen exit sat behind a heavy steel door near the storage hallway. Warm air carrying the smell of garlic butter and grilled steak drifted through the narrow corridor, while cooks rushed between counters under bright fluorescent lights. Nobody looked twice at Ethan as he walked beside Claire. Expensive people became invisible when confidence entered a room first. Claire pushed open the storage room door instead of the exit. "In here." Ethan stepped inside cautiously. Shelves lined with dry goods, paper boxes, and wine crates filled the cramped room. A single yellow light buzzed softly overhead. Claire closed the door halfway but left it slightly open toward the kitchen. "You still have not answered my question," Ethan said quietly. "Who are you?" Claire folded her arms loosely. "Someone who pays attention." "That is not an answer. It is the only one you need tonight." Ethan watched her carefully. Most people became uncomfortable under silence. Claire seemed stronger inside it. Rain hammered harder outside now, faintly echoing through the alley walls behind the restaurant. Somewhere beyond the door, servers laughed briefly before the sound disappeared again beneath clinking dishes and distant jazz music. Claire tilted her head slightly toward the cracked doorway. "Listen." Ethan stayed still. Footsteps crossed the kitchen quickly. Then voices. One of them belonged to the man in the navy cap. "He was sitting right there," the man muttered sharply. Another voice answered lower, irritated. "Maybe he already signed." Ethan's expression changed almost invisibly. "Signed what?" Claire noticed the shift immediately. "There it is," she said softly. The real reaction. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You know about the meeting?" "No. I know men like that do not follow people for no reason." Silence settled again. Ethan slipped one hand into his jacket pocket slowly, pulling out a folded document envelope. Plain white, unmarked. Claire glanced at it once. Contracts. Potential acquisition. Worth. Ethan studied her face. Enough to ruin someone if it goes wrong. Claire gave a faint nod as though that confirmed something she already suspected. Then tonight was never about dinner. Ethan almost smiled again. You profile people often? Only the dangerous ones. And which am I? Claire looked directly into his eyes. Calm. Steady. The kind who stopped sleeping a long time ago. The answer landed harder than Ethan expected. Outside the storage room, the voices faded toward the front of the restaurant again. Claire finally exhaled slowly and stepped closer to the shelf beside him, reaching for a stack of clean menus. You should leave through the alley in about 60 seconds, she said quietly. There is a black SUV parked near the newspaper stand across the street. Driver has been checking the side mirror every 30 seconds for the last 20 minutes. Ethan stared at her. You memorized that? Claire shrugged lightly. You memorize exits. I memorize people. He looked at her differently now. Not as a waitress. Not even as a stranger. More like someone carrying a hidden language he suddenly realized he did not speak. You have done this before, he said. Claire's hand paused against the menus for half a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Ethan noticed. Done what? Read rooms like this. Claire lowered the menus carefully. My father used to say the quietest person in the room usually notices the storm first. What did your father do? For the first time that evening, something shifted behind her eyes. A shadow. Old and heavy. He trusted the wrong businessmen. Before Ethan could respond, his phone vibrated sharply inside his jacket pocket. One message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. Do not sign anything tonight. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Claire, but she was already reaching for the storage room door, her expression unreadable beneath the soft yellow light. Ethan stared at the message on his phone, while rainwater slid down the tiny basement window behind the storage shelves. Do not sign anything tonight. No sender. No explanation. Just 8 words that suddenly made the entire evening feel colder. Claire opened the storage room door carefully and listened toward the kitchen before stepping halfway into the hallway again. They are moving back toward the front, she said quietly. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket without taking his eyes off her. Did you send the message? Claire shook her head once. If I wanted your attention, I would say it directly. Something about the answer felt honest. That bothered him more than the warning itself. Most people around Ethan spoke in strategies. Claire spoke in observations. The difference mattered. A line cook rushed past carrying a tray of sizzling steaks, while another server laughed breathlessly about a celebrity seated upstairs in the private lounge. Life inside Marlowe's continued normally, untouched by whatever invisible storm had settled around table 12. Claire leaned lightly against the shelf near the doorway, her posture calm but alert. Who knows you are here tonight? Ethan hesitated. That alone gave her an answer. Not many, he said finally. Then the wrong person found out. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. He had spent the last decade buying companies before competitors even realized negotiations had started. Confidentiality was religion in his world. Yet somehow, someone had tracked him to a steakhouse while he was pretending to be invisible. You think this is connected to the acquisition? Claire looked at him evenly. I think powerful men rarely hide unless another powerful man wants something from them. The simplicity of the statement made Ethan almost laugh. Not because it was wrong, because it was painfully accurate. He studied her again beneath the pale storage room light. There was no performance in her voice, no attempt to impress him, just quiet precision. You said your father trusted the wrong businessmen. Claire lowered her gaze briefly toward the floor before answering. He worked for an investment firm in Boston. Finance. Accounting. Her fingers brushed lightly against the silver ring on her hand. One bad merger destroyed the company. People lost pensions. Lawsuits started. Executives disappeared behind lawyers and private jets, while regular employees stayed behind to explain things their families could not understand. Ethan stayed silent. Claire continued softly. My father believed numbers told the truth. He learned too late that people decide which truth survives. Outside the room, thunder rolled again over Manhattan. Ethan thought about the unsigned acquisition documents in his pocket. A hospitality tech merger worth nearly $400 million. Quiet. Fast. Confidential. At least it had been supposed to be. And now you work in a steakhouse profiling strangers? He asked. Claire almost smiled at that. No. Now I pay attention before damage happens. Ethan looked toward the hallway where faint jazz drifted through the restaurant speakers again. You realize I could just walk away and ignore all this. You could. But you do not think I will. Claire met his eyes steadily. No. Men like you never leave questions unanswered. Silence settled once more between them. Calm. Heavy. Familiar in a strange way. Ethan realized he had not thought about the deal itself for several minutes now. Instead, he kept thinking about the waitress who noticed luxury watches hidden beneath cheap sleeves and fear hidden beneath expensive confidence. His phone vibrated again suddenly. This time the message came from his chief legal officer. Call me now. Urgent. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Claire noticed immediately. Bad? She asked. Ethan looked at the screen for a long second before locking the phone again. Potentially catastrophic. Claire nodded once as though she had expected exactly that. Then she stepped aside from the doorway and pointed toward the alley exit behind the kitchen. You should take the call outside. Ethan frowned slightly. And trust you alone in here? Claire reached for another stack of menus calmly. Mr. Cole, she said softly. If I wanted something from you, I would have asked by now. Ethan stepped out through the rear kitchen exit into the narrow alley behind Marlowe's Steakhouse. Cold rain immediately soaked the shoulders of his leather jacket while distant taxi horns echoed between wet brick buildings. Manhattan at night always sounded restless after a storm. Tires hissing through puddles. Sirens far away. Steam curling upward from underground vents like the city itself was breathing. Across the street, near a dark newspaper stand, a black SUV sat idling beneath a flickering street lamp exactly where Claire said it would be. Ethan stopped beneath the awning beside the back door and stared at it for a moment. The driver checked the side mirror. Then the clock on the dashboard. Then the mirror again. Predictable rhythm. Claire had noticed all of that while carrying plates through a crowded restaurant. Ethan pulled out his phone and returned the legal officer's call immediately. Tell me, he said quietly. The voice on the other end sounded tense. Where are you right now? Not signing anything. Start talking. A pause. Then a long exhale. We found irregularities inside the acquisition package about 20 minutes ago. Ethan's jaw tightened. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the awning beside him. Define irregularities. Fake liabilities hidden through shell hospitality vendors. If your signature goes through tonight, federal investigators will connect your holding company to financial fraud before sunrise. Silence. Heavy. Cold. Ethan stared at the SUV across the street while the realization settled slowly into place. Someone had built the deal specifically to collapse around him after the signature. A setup wrapped in polished numbers and legal language. Sophisticated enough that most executives would never see it coming until cameras and headlines arrived. Who else knows? Ethan asked quietly. Just me and outside counsel. We stopped the transfer authorization 5 minutes ago. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. 5 minutes. Almost the exact moment Claire warned him not to sign anything. Behind him, the kitchen door opened softly. Claire stepped outside carrying a small trash bin lined with clear plastic bags, moving naturally as if she had simply come out to finish another ordinary task during another ordinary shift. Ethan watched her from the corner of his eye while continuing the call. I want every document frozen, he said. Nobody signs anything. Nobody speaks to the press. And find out who leaked my location tonight. Already working on it. The call ended. Rain continued falling in soft silver lines beneath the streetlights. Claire set the trash bin near the alley wall and tied the bag carefully before speaking. You stayed longer than I expected. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket slowly. The deal was poisoned. Claire did not look surprised. That bothered him again. You already knew, he said quietly. No, she wiped rainwater from her wrist absent-mindedly. But men waiting in restaurants rarely care about dinner. Ethan gave a faint breath of laughter at that. Small, tired, real. For the first time all evening, Claire saw the exhaustion beneath the control, the weight behind the expensive instincts and polished restraint. Ethan looked toward the SUV again. Somebody wanted my signature before midnight. Claire followed his gaze calmly. And somebody else wanted you distracted while it happened. Ethan studied her carefully beneath the rain and dim alley light. You make observations like an investigator. Claire leaned lightly against the brick wall beside the door. I read behavior. Small things. That is more than small things. She looked toward the wet pavement for a second before answering. After my father died, I spent a long time trying to understand how intelligent people walk into disasters they should have seen coming. The sentence landed quietly between them. No drama, no self-pity, just truth. Ethan suddenly understood something uncomfortable then. Claire did not hate wealthy men. She hated blindness, especially the kind disguised as confidence. A black sedan rolled slowly past the alley entrance before disappearing into the rain. Ethan watched until the taillights vanished. You know, he said quietly, most people would have used tonight to get something from me. Claire gave a faint shrug. Most people think money changes character. And you do not? She looked directly at him beneath the soft alley light. No, I think it reveals it. Silence followed again, but this time it felt different, less suspicious, more honest. Somewhere inside the restaurant, a server laughed loudly before jazz music swallowed the sound again. Then Claire glanced toward Ethan's jacket pocket where the unsigned documents rested. You should burn those papers, she said softly, and maybe ask yourself why someone wanted you desperate enough to sign them without looking closely. Rain continued falling over Manhattan long after the dinner crowd inside Marlowe's forgot about the man at table 12. The black SUV across the street finally pulled away from the curb at exactly 9:14 p.m., disappearing slowly into traffic without headlights for the first block. Ethan noticed. Claire noticed that he noticed. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Steam drifted upward from a nearby street vent, wrapping briefly around the alley lights before dissolving into the cold night air. Ethan leaned lightly against the brick wall beside the kitchen entrance, one hand still resting near the folded acquisition documents inside his jacket. For years, pressure had sharpened him. Tonight, for the first time in a very long while, it had unsettled him instead. Not because of the deal, because a waitress carrying menus and coffee cups had seen through an entire operation faster than his legal department. Claire adjusted the sleeves of her uniform slightly against the cold. Your driver should not stay parked in one place too long, she said quietly. Ethan looked toward her. You noticed him too? Claire gave a small nod. Dark sedan on the opposite corner. Former military posture. Watches reflections instead of people. Ethan almost laughed again. This time the sound stayed longer. Softer. You realize most corporations would pay a fortune for someone who notices details the way you do. Claire's expression remained calm. Corporations usually prefer people who notice problems after the paperwork is signed. That answer stayed with him. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled faintly beyond the skyscrapers, while warm light spilled from the restaurant windows into the wet alley. Claire started toward the back door, but Ethan spoke before she could step inside. Why did you really help me tonight? She paused, not startled, just thoughtful. Because you looked tired when you walked in. Ethan frowned slightly. That is your reason? Claire turned back toward him slowly. Men who are dangerous usually enjoy power too much. You looked like someone carrying it. The sentence landed harder than she probably realized. Ethan stared at the rain-dark pavement for a second before speaking again. You know who I am now. Yes. And that does not change anything? Claire studied him quietly beneath the soft alley light. Should it? Ethan had no answer for that. Most people changed immediately after learning his name. Some became impressed. Others became nervous. A few became ambitious. Claire Bennett had become none of those things. She simply observed him more carefully. The kitchen door opened briefly behind them as Miguel stepped outside carrying empty produce boxes. He stopped when he saw Ethan standing beside Claire. Everything okay out here? Claire nodded once. Just taking a minute. Miguel looked Ethan over quickly before heading toward the dumpster farther down the alley. "Do not stay in the rain too long," he called back casually. "You will both catch pneumonia." Claire smiled faintly after he disappeared. Ethan noticed how different her smile looked when nobody was being analyzed. Smaller, realer. For one strange second, the alley felt quieter than the city around it should have allowed. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded handwritten note she had left beside the steak earlier that night. Rain had slightly softened the ink around the edges now. "You wrote this in less than 5 seconds, he said. "Yet somehow you already knew." Claire glanced at the paper briefly. "No, I suspected." "There is a difference?" "A big one." Ethan folded the note carefully again instead of throwing it away. "You trusted your instincts enough to warn a complete stranger." Claire looked toward the glowing restaurant windows behind them. "Not completely." Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. Claire met his gaze calmly. "You still have not told me why a billionaire was pretending to be invisible in a steakhouse on a Thursday night." Rain tapped softly against the metal fire escape above them while distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. Ethan looked away for a moment before finally answering. "Because sometimes the only way to learn who is honest around money is to remove the money from the room." Claire absorbed that quietly. Then she asked the one question nobody in Ethan's world had ever dared ask him directly. "And did it work?" Claire's question stayed suspended between them while rain whispered softly against the alley pavement. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering. Somewhere behind the restaurant walls, silverware clinked and muted laughter floated through the kitchen doors. But out here the city suddenly felt distant. Smaller somehow. "No," Ethan admitted quietly. "It usually does not." Claire nodded once as if she had expected exactly that answer. "People behave differently when they know who is watching them." Ethan slipped the folded note back into his jacket pocket carefully. "You sound like someone who studied this professionally." Claire leaned against the brick wall beneath the fire escape. Water dripped steadily from the metal steps above them. "I did." Ethan's expression shifted slightly. "Psychology. Behavioral analysis." That finally surprised him openly. Claire noticed immediately. "You hide it well," he said. "Most people stop listening after they hear Waitress." Ethan looked away briefly toward the glowing restaurant windows. She was right. Earlier that evening, before the note, he probably would have done the same. The realization sat uncomfortably in his chest. Claire folded her arms lightly against the cold. "I attended Columbia for 2 years. What happened?" For a moment she did not answer. Her eyes drifted toward the rain-dark street instead. "Life became expensive." Ethan understood there was more behind the sentence than she intended to say. "Your father." Claire nodded faintly. "After the merger collapsed, he spent almost 2 years trying to prove executives manipulated internal numbers before the deal closed. Nobody listened. The company lawyers buried everything in paperwork." Ethan stayed silent. Claire continued softly. "He started noticing patterns everywhere after that. Small lies, missing signatures, delayed emails. He used to tell me that people reveal themselves long before they speak." She smiled sadly for the first time that night. "I think I inherited that habit." Ethan felt something shift quietly inside him then. Not attraction, not pity, respect. The kind built slowly when intelligence appears where arrogance expected simplicity. "And after Columbia?" he asked. Claire glanced down at the silver ring on her finger again. "My father got sick. My mother already worked double shifts at a hospital outside Boston. Tuition disappeared first. Then the apartment." Her voice remained steady. That somehow made the story heavier. "So I came here." Ethan looked around the narrow alley. Rainwater shimmered beneath the streetlights while steam drifted upward near the curb. "And now you work 12-hour shifts serving steak to people who probably assume you never finished community college." Claire almost smiled again. "Sometimes assumptions are useful." Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose. "You know what is strange?" Claire looked toward him. "I have spent most of my life sitting across from executives who graduated from the best schools in the country." He paused briefly. Very few of them notice half of what you notice tonight. Claire's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. That is because powerful people often stop observing once they believe they understand the room. The sentence landed directly where it needed to. Ethan realized then that Claire had not only read the danger surrounding the deal tonight. She had read him. The exhaustion, the caution, the isolation hidden beneath polished control. His phone buzzed again softly in his pocket, but he ignored it this time. Across the street, headlights reflected across the wet pavement, while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas without noticing the billionaire standing beside a waitress in a rain-soaked alley. Ethan looked toward Claire carefully. You could have done something very different with your life. Claire followed his gaze toward the city. Maybe. Do you regret it? For the first time all evening, Claire hesitated before answering. Not because she lacked words, because she chose them carefully. I regret how quickly people decide what someone is worth. Silence followed, heavy and honest. Ethan suddenly understood why her warning tonight felt different from every calculated favor he had ever received in his world. Claire had not helped him because of his money. She helped him despite it. Then the kitchen door opened behind them again, and the restaurant manager stepped halfway into the alley looking frustrated. Claire, he called sharply. Table 14 has been waiting 10 minutes for their bourbon. Claire straightened immediately. Calm returned to her posture like armor sliding back into place. Coming. She turned toward the door, but Ethan spoke before she disappeared inside. Claire. She paused. Rain glimmered softly in her hair beneath the alley light. Ethan looked at her steadily. You may have saved me hundreds of millions tonight. Claire held his gaze for one quiet second before answering. No, she said softly. I think I just stopped you from trusting the wrong room. 3 weeks later, the rain was gone from Manhattan, but Marlowe's Steakhouse still carried the same warm amber glow behind its tall windows every Thursday night. Claire Bennett moved through the dinner rush with the same quiet rhythm as always. Coffee refills, steak orders, soft smiles for tired tourists and impatient businessmen. Nothing about her had changed on the surface. That was the strange thing about quiet people. The world often shifted around them while they stayed exactly who they were. At 8:17 p.m., the front door opened again. Claire noticed the man immediately, even before the hostess greeted him. This time there was no leather jacket pretending to be ordinary. No hidden watch beneath worn sleeves. Ethan Cole walked in wearing a dark navy overcoat and charcoal suit tailored with the effortless precision of old money. Yet somehow he looked less guarded than the man who first entered during the storm 3 weeks earlier. The hostess straightened instantly after recognizing him from business magazines. Mr. Cole, welcome back. Ethan nodded politely. Table 12, if it is available. Claire heard the request from across the dining room while setting down a glass of Cabernet beside another table. A younger waitress near the service station whispered under her breath. That is Ethan Cole. The Ethan Cole. Claire simply picked up another coffee pot. Some people entered restaurants carrying status like perfume. Ethan entered carrying silence. That was different now. He sat at table 12 alone again, though tonight there were no suspicious men at the bar and no hidden documents inside his jacket. Outside, yellow taxi lights reflected softly across clean pavement, while jazz drifted low through the restaurant speakers. Claire approached the table calmly with a menu tucked beneath her arm. Good evening, she said professionally. Will it be the steak again? Ethan looked up at her and smiled faintly. Real this time. You remembered. Claire reached for the water glass beside him. You tip like someone who has complicated thoughts. Ethan laughed quietly under his breath. The sound surprised both of them a little. Black coffee too? She asked. Please. As Claire poured water into his glass, Ethan noticed something tucked beside the register near the service station. A thick behavioral psychology textbook filled with handwritten notes and color tabs. Columbia University printed across the spine in faded silver letters. He looked toward Claire again. You went back. Claire followed his gaze briefly. Night classes. Ethan nodded slowly. Good. No dramatic speech followed. No offer to pay her tuition. No oversized gesture designed to rescue her life. Somehow that made the moment more meaningful. Claire handed him the menu, but Ethan did not open it immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small folded envelope. Plain white, familiar. He slid it gently across the table toward her. Claire frowned slightly before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten note in neat black ink. "You were right." Claire read the sentence twice before looking up at him. Ethan rested one hand against the coffee cup she had just placed beside him. Steam curled softly between them beneath the warm restaurant lights. "The investigation uncovered everything," he said quietly. "Fake shell companies, manipulated vendors, internal leaks." Claire folded the note carefully. "I am guessing someone had a very bad week." Ethan almost smiled. "Several people." Silence settled comfortably this time instead of cautiously. Nearby, glasses clinked and conversations drifted through the restaurant like distant waves. Claire looked at Ethan thoughtfully for a moment before asking, "So why come back?" Ethan studied her across the table. "Not the uniform, not the restaurant. Because," he said quietly, "3 weeks ago a waitress noticed I was standing in the wrong room before I did." Claire lowered her eyes briefly toward the folded note in her hand. Ethan continued softly, "Most people around money tell you what helps them. You told me the truth." Claire looked back at him beneath the warm amber lights. Calm, steady. "Truth is usually quiet," she said. "People just stop listening for it." Ethan sat silently for a second after that. Then he finally opened the menu with the smallest smile touching the corner of his mouth while Claire reached for the coffee pot again. And somewhere beyond the restaurant windows, Manhattan kept rushing past them, too loud to notice that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who never needed power to begin with.